this session today. So welcome back to the big week for small business. And on behalf of our full team putting together this event, thank you so much for being with us here in this breakout session. We hope you're enjoying the time with us this week. Now, this afternoon's session is meant to help you look beyond the day-to-day challenges, if we're able to do that, to build a team and make a plan with a proactive strategy to carry your business forward beyond the pandemic. If we're lucky enough to look past the pandemic. We'll start with a few questions about our speaker to kick off the conversation, and then we'll open the discussion for a group conversation. Now, when Dr. Slaughter is talking and things resonate with you that you'd like to ask her about and you'd like to dig into a little bit more deeply, please post that in the chat. We'll wait till Christel Slaughter finishes her presentation, but then we'll be turning to the chat. So it doesn't have to be exactly at the right moment. You just put your question in the chat and I want you to unmute your microphone and ask the question yourself. Or if you're shy or have other things going on in the background that you prefer for me to ask the question, we're happy to do that as well. A few more housekeeping notes before we begin. If you haven't already, and this is actually the best participant group I've worked with so far, but if you haven't already, please mute your microphones, turn off your camera. Not that we don't want to see you, but it takes up bandwidth and then everything becomes a little bit glitchy. You can both mute yourself and turn off your camera using the toolbar on your screen. And once Christel Slaughter is finished with her presentation, you turn your camera back on if you'd like for us to see you while you're asking questions. We do have a large group that is joining as we speak, and so the Q&A segment, you can either post a question in the meeting chat, or you can raise your hand by using that tool in the bar, or if you'd like to go old school, that's okay too. Turn on your camera and just raise your hand and we'll try to recognize you. Don't have to tell you where the bathrooms are. That's nice. And so finally, let me just introduce you to our panelist today. And full disclosure, the panelist and I are good friends because she runs our Small Business Council, which is the policy committee at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that represents small businesses across the country. So I'm pleased to introduce my friend Christel Slaughter, who is the CEO of SSA Consultants in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And as I had said before, she is the chair of the Chamber's Small Business Council. Christel, take it away.
Thank you, Tom, and I appreciate the warm introduction, and I welcome everyone who's joined us today and has chosen to hear a little bit more about how you can build teams for the long term. When we first started talking about this topic, I shared with some of the organizers of the summit that this is really one of my favorite things to talk about because there's some very fundamental things that leaders can do and managers can do. And as I was perusing the list of people who had signed up and how large your company is or how small your company is and what your particular title is and got sort of an idea of what kind of teams you may be thinking about as you're talking about building sustainable and high-performing teams. There were a number of things that came to mind. And the first one is that we're all used to being on teams. Even in the workplace, people are on multiple teams as organizations moved away from tremendous hierarchical structures like they had in the 70s and 80s into more cross-functional teams or even matrix organizations. We found people learning that they needed to be nimble enough to move from one team easily to another. And then team leaders or managers, as we often call team leaders, had to be even more nimble to be able to incorporate teams with people and boundaries that are permeable. So you may be managing various projects with different people on the different project teams, Or you may have one solid team that's just yours and really then have an opportunity to sort of build it in the way that you want to. But when you look at sports teams and you look at some of the experiences that you've had, it's sometimes good to reflect on, if I was on a good team, I had a good team experience, or we were very successful. We won this tournament. We won the bid on a particular project. We won the repeat business from this customer. What made it good, and what was it that your team did that really gave it the competitive edge? And that's what we've spent some time dissecting with our clients and talking about how you can take that on the front end and make it happen. So let's focus on a few of the characteristics of high performing teams and how you as a leader can build that team for the long term. So if you have control, and I'll come back and talk about if you inherit your team, but if you are beginning the team and you have the opportunity to actually be part of the selection, either for creating a whole new team or filling a position here and there as people have moved on to other opportunities, hire only A players. I just can't tell you how important that is. And I can't tell you how many times I work with a client who feels like, well, gee, this is expedient. This person is in the market. We've been looking for a while. I really need to fill this position. Not exactly what I was looking for, but I think he or she's going to be okay. If you have a team of 7 A players, you can probably survive a B plus. But you can't have a lot of B pluses. And you sure can't have B pluses and C's and D's and people that you're dragging along. You're never going to win the game. You're never going to win the Super Bowl. You're never going to get where you're trying to go. And so if you start with A players, your job is so much easier as a leader. It's exponentially different. You're really taking them from a place of strength and then building the team to make them even stronger. Checking references. I know people say, well, gee, references don't tell you, what they used to, or their HR department won't tell. Oh, you'd be surprised what people tell you. We call people, we call with our clients, we teach them how to call and talk about the job that you're trying to fill and say, is this person really better with people or with numbers? All right, now, as a reference, I don't feel like I'm necessarily costing the person a job. They're much better with numbers. Don't put them in front of a client. They're good with numbers, or they're great with clients. Good luck getting their sales reports in. So how valuable is that bit of information? You may still want to hire the candidate, but now you know what you need to work on in development. If you're selecting your team, you really want to create diversity. And I'm not talking about the obvious diversity and inclusion that we talk about now with race and gender and age diversity. I'm talking about people from different backgrounds, people who have been trained in different disciplines, people who have sophisticated degrees and people who do not have sophisticated degrees. It's one of my favorites. People who have lived in different places, people who think differently. There is not an organization that exists today that isn't probably going to have to deal with some sort of disruption in the environment through competition, through technology disruption, that you're not going to need nimble people and innovative people and creative people to solve the problems of the future that we don't even know what they are today. So work on that and look for what Netflix calls the rare responsible person. So Netflix has built an empire off of looking for these kinds of people. And let me tell you what they sound like. Those people are self-motivated. So we have a lot of leaders who say, please teach me motivation. Teach me how to motivate people. Well, there are things you can do to motivate people, but quite honestly, people motivate themselves. And so if you have someone who is already predisposed to that, then again, what you're trying to do is accelerate that, is set up opportunities so they can self-motivate. And good people will feel like, gee, maybe I'm burning out, I need a little break, maybe I need to sharpen my saw, but they'll be motivated to do so themselves. You want people who are self-aware. There's nothing worse than a blind spot. I tell people all the time, if you have your phone and it comes up on caller ID, what is your first reaction? And then think about yourself. If you're calling someone, what is their first reaction? Are you self-aware enough to know that that person's going to say, oh gosh, that's Christel Slaughter. I really would love to talk to her, but she goes on and on and on. I don't want to talk right now, which I think is probably what some of my friends would say. Or do they say, oh, this is great. Wow, this is Christel. This must be something interesting, good, whatever. Or this is somebody I really care about and she's delightful and wanted to be with. Are you self-aware? Is that person self-aware? Half your work is done if they are picking things up themselves. They need to be self-disciplined. You don't need somebody watching over someone else. We have a client that just put GPS monitors on their entire fleet. They have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trucks and vehicles and equipment. And they now can put up a screen with different colored dots and they know where everyone is at any moment in time. And if a dot is in the same place for too long, they can go on the map and figure out if that's a convenience store or a shopping mall. And I think they're going in the absolute opposite direction of the culture that they worked so hard to create. Let's get some self-disciplined people who know what we're trying to do, and let's give them the tools that they need to do better, not to be monitored. And finally, these rare responsible people are interested in self-improvement. They will, on their own, go out and surf the internet, find resources, bring up things to you that they think could help them and maybe even some of your other team members. So once you get this collection of these rare responsible people, what do you want to do? Well, the first thing you need to do is give them context. Make sure they understand their goals, the purpose of your organization, the purpose of your team. It's so amazing to me that leaders take this for granted, or maybe they talk about it in orientation and it really is not something that they come back to. It's very hard for people to put themselves in the leader's shoes. It's very hard for them to understand really what a company or an organization is trying to do without giving them the appropriate context. So how do you give them context? Well, you talk about the strategy and you talk about how fits into the strategy of the organization. I don't care if they're answering the phone or making copies or mailing out brochures or forms or tracking certain things. How does that fit with what it is we're trying to do? They can't give you suggestions on how to do better if they don't understand that. What are the metrics that are important to us? We oftentimes tell clients that if you give us the keys to your car, we'll drive you wherever you want to go. And what we mean by that is, if you tell us what you want, we'll help you figure out the metrics. And once you start measuring something and sharing that information, you will begin to get more of it. And be real careful, because if you are measuring volume, you're going to get a lot of volume. You're going to get a lot of volume. You might get a lot of inaccuracies or waste or something else if it's a single dimension, but you're going to get a lot of that. Now, if you put money on top of that, a performance bonus, some sort of team-based reward like gain sharing, wow. If you incent cooperation, you'll get a lot of it. So let them know what the strategy is. Let them know what metrics are important. Let them know what your assumptions are about the market and about your competition and about the organization. Let them know what the stakes are. What's in it for them? What's in it for the company? You know, if we're able to do this, then we're really dressed up. We ought to be able to go out in the market and maybe be attracted to merge with a larger organization. This is what that would mean for us. And finally, give them transparency into your decision making. Explain why. I've had people tell me the best thing about working remotely is that they feel like they're not as rushed as they were in their offices when they have meetings. And so when they're on Microsoft Teams or Zooms or WebEx with their team, they're able to talk about things that maybe they didn't feel that they had the luxury of talking about before. Let them in on your thought processes. Let them understand how you think, because next time when you ask them to make the decisions, they may be better prepared to do so. So what do you not want to do? Don't try to control them. Try and get away from top-down decision making. One of my clients asked me last week, she said, Christel, we're done with remote. We're ready to go, return to work. I'm writing the policy. but I have 2 people in some offices. We have plenty of room. Can you help me figure out where they should go? Now they're by departments, and the departments are geographically and physically located close to one another. I said, sure, I am happy to do that. And I love that kind of exercise. But the reality is, why aren't they doing that themselves? She said, well, they're not even together. I said, perfect. That's great. Let them get on Zoom together and see how far they get, right? Let them try. You know, if they get stuck and they come back, okay, I couldn't do it. Great. You can jump in. This is a test. This is a great way to cut your teeth. This is like training wheels on the bicycle right before we take them off and you go on your own. So watch for that, watch top-down decision-making, and watch that you don't put in too many layers of management approval. A lot of us really are control freaks, and a lot of us like to catastrophize and imagine the worst. And the reality is, if somebody sends something to a client or does something, it's usually not the end of the world. It is something that we can probably deal with, repair, apologize. Certainly you don't want to take unnecessary risks, but you also don't want to hold back your good people. And if they make a mistake or somebody does something dumb, try not to discipline them. Try to ask yourself, what context did I fail to set? What is it in me that didn't save that person from doing that? And what you realize is when people really understand your mission and really understand your goals, that's when they can get committed. And once they're committed and they're engaged, you see a difference in them, and it spills over to other team members. And how can you tell if your people are engaged? Listen to them. Give them what we call the pronoun test. If they say, he told us to do this, or corporate wants that report, they said we have to do such and such, they're not engaged. That's not them, that's somebody else. When they say we need to get that report in because corporate needs to know such and such, or we decided to do this, or I am going to go ahead and set this up in a different way, that's invaluable. That's something you never want to lose, and you really do want to spread it to other people. Now let me talk a little bit about team needs. Leaders have a tendency to focus on the task needs, our production level, our service level, our market share, sales growth, volume. Those are kind of task-oriented types of things. And the next time you have a meeting, whether it's virtual or in person, kind of see how much time you spend on that versus talking about maintenance of the team, how well we're doing things, how well we're passing information, how well do we understand what's going on. These are meetings and conversations and even sometimes retreats that allow us to step back and have the team really do some self-reflection. Even getting to know one another better can help the team function better. And this is where you need to be intentional. Force the team to spend some time on these activities. We have a tendency to start talking about our maintenance needs and our internal processes and how we can do things better, and then we immediately get drawn back to goals and task activities. I provided a team effectiveness critique for you to use. This is a very powerful but simple tool. I think Erin may put it in the chat as a PDF. But if that's wrong, Tom can correct me. They have directions on it. It will walk you through a conversation with your team that can be very, very helpful in terms of understanding team needs and what the maintenance needs are for a team to really, really communicate better, make decisions better together. You know, it reminds me of watching, my husband and I both love basketball, and we've watched NBA teams since Larry Bird played for the Celtics. And we had this wonderful example of, great team, Boston. There you go, Tom. I wasn't even thinking about that. You know, the Celtics, they had very balanced scoring. I mean, they were a real team. Michael Jordan came along. He was the first one. He busted all my examples. I mean, you know, he was clearly a superstar, and you didn't see that balanced scoring. But you still saw a team that learned to play with one superstar, two superstars, three superstars over the years. And the amazing thing to me was that they didn't even have to turn around and look at one another. somebody would be running down the court as fast as they possibly could, and they would take the ball and they would toss it. And they knew exactly where their teammate was going to be. Guys, that doesn't happen by accident. These are amazing athletes, but I'm sorry, that's rehearsed. That's over and over and over again. That is having so much knowledge of my teammate that it does almost become intuitive. I know this person is going to do this first. I know we're going to do this second. And when a team becomes that efficient and that well run with their own activities, their effectiveness goes up just astronomically. And their excitement and the fun of putting together some sort of product or service as a team really becomes a very emotionally satisfying experience, and it builds on itself, and the team becomes more and more successful. Now let me talk about conflict, because I told you to get A players, and then I told you to get diversity, and then I told you to back off and give them a little space, and I promise you're going to have conflict. It is inevitable, and don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of it. From conflict that's handled well, we get more understanding, we get additional knowledge sometimes. Sometimes we even build relationships where there were none before, or a rocky relationship was there before. What you want to get rid of is a culture of gossip, a culture of favoritism. These things cause very negative conflict. Try and take that out. Try and get that on top of the table. Sometimes the leader has got to get involved in conflict. Sometimes it's better for you to stay out of it, but sometimes you have got to bring it out on top of the table and be open about it and deal directly with it and talk about how you expect people to handle conflict situations. Too many organizations that I know allow people to go into the manager's office, AKA you, and go in and complain about someone else when that person has never gone to that person first and lodged the problem that they're having. So the first line you always need is, and what did that person have to say when you told them that that created a problem for you? Now, if they did that and the person blew up, fine, you've got to get involved. But the reality is that lots of times we make it very easy for people to go around the conflict, and it just gets worse and worse. Once you get involved, if you notice that it's the same person every time, now you got a problem. And so I want you to give them what we call the keeper test. And I had this happen just Monday afternoon. I had a client call me, and we went through the keeper test. He had a very talented person who had been there over 20 years, who had gotten a fabulous job offer in a peer company, very similar job, more money, but not that much more money. The question is, if that happened to you, would you fight to keep that person? If you have to think about that for more than 10 seconds, you need to wave goodbye, give them a nice severance package, and find a star, find somebody great. If they're not worth fighting for, if they're causing problems, if they're stirring the pot, if they're the source of conflict, if they're not a good cultural fit, if they're a superstar and so they think they can come in late, or they don't have to turn their reports in on time, or somebody else can help them with something that nobody else gets help for, you have a problem on your hands. And this is the job of a leader. I have so many people who say to me privately, Christel, if my boss would just do his or her job, this would be such a better place to work. Get rid of the dead wood. Get rid of the people who don't pull their weight. We know who they are. Don't they know who they are? Sometimes managers do, sometimes managers don't. Netflix has a saying, we need no brilliant jerks here. So we're hiring brilliant people, but we don't need a jerk. So you gotta have both. You gotta be brilliant and a non-jerk if you want to stay there. And I would say the same with you. Well, a couple more points before I open it up for some questions. Let's talk about sharing leadership and making decisions. So when you make a decision as a leader, that's your job. You have the power, you have the authority, it's your responsibility to get things done. You probably get pretty good at it. I want you to start thinking, if I'm really trying to build a team, instead of my automatically making a decision, can I involve somebody else? Can I involve the entire team? What are the things where it's going to be much stronger with a consensus decision made by the whole team? Now, consensus decisions means that everybody walks away saying, I think this is going to work. Let's try this. It takes a long time to come to that. And it takes people who are willing to listen, open their mind, understand other people's ideas. And sometimes that's not even done in one meeting. Sometimes it's an issue, it's a problem, it's something that's lingered for a while. We talk about it, we table it, we say, let's think about it, maybe divide up, go out and find out, how did other people handle this same situation? What you don't want to do is put them out of their misery by being so frustrated that you make the decision yourself. Because now what you've done is you've given them a little bit of taste of leadership, and then you're going to yank it back. Don't be afraid to share your leadership. Show me a leader who's afraid that somebody else is going to get their job, and I'll show you a leader where somebody else is going to get their job. They make you look good. They're the only thing that can make you look good, and they can make you look bad in a second. So your results really are based on the work that they do. Begin to train them how to make decisions on their own. And people tell me, well, Christel, my people don't even talk in meetings. Oh, okay. There is a symptom of a much larger problem. So now we've taught them, this is really not a meeting, this is a lecture, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to tell you things, and then I'm going to ask for input and hope that nobody has any, and then we're going to all go back to work. And people are smart. They take no risk by doing that. You're making all the decisions. You take all the risks. They're following exactly what you say. And if something goes wrong, the first thing they'll say is, well, I just did what you told me to do because I kind of turned off my brain a long time ago. Don't let them get away with that. People are smarter than that. Doesn't matter what their job is, what their level is in the organization. The closer somebody is to the problem, to the process, to the actual job itself, the better chance they have of knowing how to improve it. So don't overthink them. Let them get involved. And then the last ingredient for a successful team that you really want to build, and it's a hard one. And I think it's the most important. It's a quick 5-letter word, and it's trust. It's trust. If your team trusts you and your team trusts one another, it can solve a lot of problems. It eliminates conflict before it begins. It can make people who are not as sharp, not as competent, maybe don't have as much experience, look fantastic because other people are picking up the slack, other people are helping them and supporting them and moving forward for them. Trust is a fragile type of thing. It's hard to get. And you get trust by being trustworthy, saying what you're going to do, following through on what you do. I don't know if any of you all ever read about the founder of Southwest Airlines, Herb Kelleher, but I was kind of a groupie back in the day. He passed away a few years ago, and I continue to read about him. He put his people before his customers, his shareholders, I'm not sure about regulators, but everybody else, elected officials, etc. And there are story after story of him being invited to go give a speech at some unbelievable conference, win an award that was going to be presented somewhere, but he had an employee banquet or he had an employee convocation, and he didn't want to miss it. And he didn't go in and say, I gave up this opportunity to give this speech or win this award to be with you. No, he didn't have to say that because word got out and people knew. And he genuinely put his people first, and they trusted him. They trusted his decisions. They trusted the prioritization, the hard calls that he had to make. He knew the names of his employees. He knew about his employees. He wrote them letters. He sent them cards. That's how you get trust. You invest in people, and then they begin to trust you. So I can't see hundreds and hundreds of tiles. But is anybody out there married, or in a very serious relationship with someone, has a partner? Years ago, I was having lunch back in the day when we all could go out and have lunch. And I was actually with a very good friend, and someone else, a friend, came over to the table and leaned over to whisper to me, which I thought was really rather rude to the other person. And she said, I just wanted to tell you, did you know your husband is here in the restaurant? And I said, no, really? And she said, well, yes, and he's with another woman. And I said, oh, okay. And she looked at me and she said, do you want me to tell you where they're sitting? And I said, no, it's okay. And she said, don't you want to get up and go, look, she's very attractive. And I said, oh, well, good. I'm glad he's with somebody that looks good. I said, no, really, honestly, I don't know what was on his calendar today, but I'm sure it's some explanation, and I can just ask him about it tonight. I'm really kind of on a tight timeline. I need to get back to work. Well, just so happens that when we were leaving, I decided to go to the restroom, and I did glance in the other dining room and saw my husband, and he was with a very attractive woman who happened to be our personal bank officer. And in my dim mind, I remembered him telling me I'm going to be going to lunch with Missy next week to talk about redoing some of our financing, etc. And I thought, that's great. I'm glad he's having that lunch. I didn't even go over to the table to say hello. The first thought that comes in your mind tells you your trust level. If I tell you that I saw your employee doing something, maybe in a location where you couldn't imagine why they would be there, or I saw them online during work hours while we're working remotely, what's the first thing you think? If you trust that person, you think, well, there must have been, maybe they were doing some research. Maybe, I know we're trying to get in this new market. When coworkers trust one another, they don't worry about, well, gee, why did they cut me out of that meeting? Why did they not include me in that decision? Why did they take that customer's call? That's my customer. That's not a team. That's a bunch of individuals with own individual agendas. So again, help build trust between you and your individual team members, and find ways to help them build trust with one another. Pair them up on assignments, give 3 or 4 of them the same thing to do so that they learn to work together. And I promise you that is going to cover up for processes that have gaps in them, and policies that maybe have some holes in it, and you will never regret the time that you invest in them. So with that, I'm going to press pause and see if we have some questions. Tom?
Well, Christel, as we're waiting for folks to figure out how to use the chat function, I'll take the moderator's prerogative and jump right in. So when you and I were talking about this panel, you chuckled with me and said, how ugly do we want to get? And, quite frankly, your story about having lunch, you could have gone in a different direction. We could have gotten like right into the bare bones of ugliness, but we didn't. And I knew that because I know Bill. But one of the toughest things is living the phrase of long to hire, quick to fire. And Christel, you advise companies big and small on personnel, and you've shared with us, the strategic benefits of building the A team. But it doesn't always go well. Can you just dig in a little bit on that long to hire and quick to fire, and what you insist on with your clients to make sure that that doesn't get in the way of building the A team?
Yeah, Tom, great question. I think that the long to hire is really important. People who do the best job that we work with oftentimes will use teams of people to interview, because different people pick up different things from candidates. And if you are looking at a candidate with rose-colored glasses and 2 or 3 other people have interviewed that person, and they're picking up things about why they left their last position, or why they don't think they would be a good fit, it really is important to know that. So taking the time to do that, going through all of those steps, behavioral interview questions that are more structured, that have to do with judgment calls or case examples, or how they would handle certain things, will show you some insight into, you don't want to have trick questions, but you do want to understand how someone makes judgments. You cannot teach people how to make judgments. You can teach them skills, but that's in them. Once they're on board, I think that trying to get them off to a good start is important, but even with the best efforts, if within the first 90 days you don't think it's going to be a good fit, it is not going to be a good fit. I promise you, if you don't see that within 90 days, it's better to go back and say, and look, Zappos, as an example, and other companies do this too. When they hire you, and I can't remember if it's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, but it's somewhere in that window. If you decide, hey, I made a bad decision, I don't really like Zappos, you go to HR, they will write you $1,000 check, shake your hand, thank you so much, and congratulate you for knowing that that was not a good idea. And hey, that's a win for everybody. Turnover is extremely costly. So you lose relationships, you lose time, you have expenses. So that slow to hire is really important to get the right person. But again, once you get them in, don't be afraid of either working with someone to make sure you've given them every opportunity to understand the context and expectations before you say this isn't going to work out. But if you've done a good job, oftentimes people know. They know it's not right, and they're really, in some cases, relieved to have the manager come to them and say, this doesn't seem to be working out, and ending things on a high note. So to me, the most egregious problem is anything ethical and anything that's even marginally a subordinate that lies about something that's important, a subordinate that misrepresents their work or the company. Or somebody who has in essence violated one of our core values. Those are no-brainers.
And we've got a bunch more questions. We're getting a lot.
Let me just say the hardest thing. The hardest thing is the great.
Elizabeth Peterson is the quickest on the draw. And Elizabeth, could you unmute yourself and perhaps even turn on your camera if you'd like, and ask the question, or I'm happy to either. So now I'll do that awkward virtual pause and wait to see if you'd like to ask it yourself.
It's not so awkward, Tom. I don't mind asking it myself. I'm not going to turn my camera on, though. I'm not quite ready for that.
All right, you sound great. Thank you.
But Christel, you brought up a really good point earlier that I've experienced at my business, which is you brought up gossip culture. This is something I've experienced before, and I'm curious if you have any techniques for kind of dealing with that in an effective and efficient way.
The first technique is make sure that you are the source of information as quickly as you possibly can be. In the situation that I described where someone has another job offer, I advise the CEO that he immediately begin working on the message that he is going to send in case that person does leave, because everyone needs to hear that immediately from him. And if people get used to, Elizabeth, you're being the source of good information and then even being approachable, they can send you a text or an email or come in your office or call you to get clarification. They will start doing that, and that will spread. The grapevine is a great source of gossip, and it is actually right 33% of the time. The problem is you don't know which 33% you're getting is right, and 66% can be very destructive. So people feed off of that, and the more starved they are for good information, the more that happens. If you think you can find the source of some of the gossip, because you can do everything that I'm saying and still have a culture of gossip because of the way certain team members behave, I would nip that in the bud in a very professional way. I would try and sit down with that person or have a Zoom chat and say, you know, it's come to my attention that some of the things that people are being worried about are comments that you have said you've heard or misinformation that's being spread. And I need you to not do that. I need you to come and ask me before we go out and talk about these kinds of things. I think sometimes we let people get away with that. We let people talk about other people. Look out your window when you go back to work after you have a meeting. Look out your window and see if people are in the parking lot in little clumps talking to one another. Okay, that means they're getting more information outside the meeting than in the meeting. So look for those kinds of signs, and then set some ground rules. Tell people, guys, we got to be open with one another. And if you have a question about something, and look, if I can't tell you, if for some reason it's still confidential, I will tell you that. I will just say, I can't talk about that right now, but as soon as I can, I will. And
Thank
again,
you, Christel. We've got a whole bunch of more questions. This is fantastic. Nancy Peters Lewis, if you're on, could you unmute and ask Christel about coaching a team member up? Okay, so Christel, Nancy Peters Lewis asks, what are some techniques to coach a team member up who may be an A with attitude, but perhaps a B or C in the learning curve?
so you sort of have to take people from where they are to where you want them to be. And I think that working closely with someone, again, going back to giving them context, purpose, objectives, the why, clarity, why we do what we do, and then giving them certain challenges or tasks or things that are parts of a whole, rather than giving them more than they can handle, and seeing how well they do with that. You know, mentoring and coaching is an intensive process sometimes, and it's not for the faint of heart. I personally would rather hire somebody who's just all good on all that, but you know, it doesn't work that way. And so taking time yourself to invest in that person to figure out what do they do well and where's that point where they begin to lose it. And so, you know, bringing that B or C performance up little by little is helpful. If you compare them with another team member for certain things, if you're a great manager, you know this team member does this one thing great and this team member does this one thing great. And you literally can begin to sort of cut and paste and try and weave that together. If you're trying to coach them for attitude, you just got to be real direct and you got to be very specific. If someone sits in your meetings, I don't know if I can do this on the Zoom call, but if someone sits in your meetings and kicks their chair back and counts the holes in the ceiling tile in our old buildings that some of us have, okay, not acceptable, right? If you're in the meeting, you need to be engaged. And what that means is you're making eye contact, you're nodding, you're giving some sort of nonverbal signals, and you're speaking every once in a while. In agreement or disagreement, doesn't matter, as long as you're doing it professionally. So you really can't tolerate those things, because once you let that go, people think you condone that. So good luck with your coaching. It's important.
Thank you. We really are getting great questions here. So thank you to all of the participants. Abir Sassi has a question about how can he be sure, how can he trust my team? How can he be sure of trusting his team? Are there any techniques that you would advise?
Oh, hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Did I get it right?
Quite interesting. Thank you, Christel. That was my question about trust. How can I trust my team or one of my teammates? That means, is there any techniques or any methods or any tests to do just to be sure that it's the right teammate and everything is going well?
Oh boy.
Thank you.
Abir, is this one of your subordinates or a peer?
Supporters.
Okay, all right, better. I think that you can be honest with the subordinate about wanting to build a good relationship, and a good relationship means open and honest communication, et cetera, and trust. And that some people are just, they're more natural at communicating things. They will say, Abir, I'm working on that now. Otherwise, you don't know they're working on it. Or I'm going to get to that as soon as something else is finished. So sometimes it's the basics of communication. Sometimes it's, you know, maybe they've done something that makes them seem untrustworthy. I think you got to talk about that and be willing. Sometimes we're wrong as leaders. Sometimes I've made an assumption about someone. I didn't realize what else they were working on or was in their way. But sometimes they just need to know how I expect to interact with them. And again, I think if it's done on an adult to adult basis, it can be very helpful in opening conversation. I just got to say this, Tom, I know we have a lot of questions. I thought you were going to talk about a peer, and I do want to say this to the group. If you're swimming with sharks, you cannot bleed, okay? Don't bleed your food after that. So there are dysfunctional cultures. There are organizations where people are incented to be internally competitive, and that's not the place to let down your guard. So I just wanted to say, be smart, build your team with what you have, but be careful if you're in one of those toxic environments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alan Thayer, I think you have a very good question about quick to fire. Could you ask Christel?
Yes, obviously, not all employees are A employees, and some of them have been around for a while. Do you have any suggestions on a conversation to have with the employees? So one, the employee feels good about themselves, they feel good about your organization, but they also don't go filing claims with the state labor commissioner or their local court.
There's a lot in that question, Alan. There's a whole lot in there. The longer someone has been with the organization, the tougher it is. And sometimes the organization's needs have changed and the person has not been able to come along. And that's unfortunately the fault of the organization, but it is reality. I think that giving the person feedback about deficiencies is very important. I think that, if there is any way to transfer them to a job that better fits their skills or bringing their skills up, that's always the preferred alternative. But when that's not there, then I think sitting with the person and talking about the fact that it's not a good fit and that they must be uncomfortable by that. They deserve to be in a place where they are comfortable. We believe in, and I know this is hard during COVID, but we believe in treating people very well on their way out. It's a sign of your culture, and it tells your existing employees word gets out, they figure it out, and it tells them, we value our people. So, making sure that you are doing the right thing by them, giving them either time to find another job, even if they go home immediately or cease to be part of the company, maybe they're paid for an extra period of time, depending on their length of service or level. You can't really prevent people from making false charges or twisting something in their mind. But I think if you've done what you're supposed to do and you document it and you work with your HR professional or you talk to someone about, am I doing this the right way? Am I missing a step? Now you've done everything that you can. And unfortunately, there are litigious people in the world who want an easy win. Can't do anything about that. But a lot of times if you've helped people and then we've even helped people in our own organization who didn't fit right and we thought it was our fault that we left them too long. We've helped them get other jobs where we thought they would be more successful. And so, I think that taking the high road, Alan, is really what you're looking for.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Christel. I think Ron Veristek has a question. Ron, if you're able to unmute yourself and if you wish, turn on your camera and ask Christel. There we go. Ron?
Yeah. I'm trying to get in. Oh, there we go. Okay. Can you see me?
You sound great.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, great.
You look great.
Yeah, performance appraisals. What are your thoughts on performance appraisals as far as organizations are concerned these days? Do you think it's absolutely necessary to have formal performance appraisals or not? We're a fairly high-level professional organization that supports the U.S. government and NATO with a lot of skilled professionals that are doing great jobs overall. And we do get customer feedback if there's an issue with a particular employee. So what are your thoughts these days, with regard to performance appraisals?
We have two major projects right now where we're developing comprehensive performance management systems. And I really have strong feelings about the pros and cons of that. So, Ron, that's a great question. I think that giving employees feedback is one of the most important roles that a leader has. If you're getting customer feedback, good, bad, indifferent. The sooner you get that to that individual employee or the team, the better. And even the team, because if we have the right culture and atmosphere, even if one person stumbled, it's all of our issues or problems. Or one person had a great success story, we all ought to share in that glory. But I will tell you that millennials and Generation Z seems to be the same way. They demand it. They want feedback after every presentation, after every meeting with a client. This idea of an annual performance evaluation is not appealing to them. They want much more regular feedback and immediate in some cases. And we're seeing a lot more of that, and a lot more of pulse surveys where we're trying to get two-way communication going, even in this strange time. If you're reading between lines, you can hear me say that I don't care for performance evaluations, even though we do them. And we do them a lot of times because in larger companies, in divisions with less professional staff, you talked about your staff being very professional and well-trained, they perform a purpose. They're good as a paper trail. They're good for promotional opportunities between raters. So I'm looking for someone that we might look internally to promote into this open position. And if I have some good records, which is really what a performance evaluation is, then that can help me. I really don't like it when they get tied to pay, because people jimmy the system. I don't care what matrix or complicated formula you come up with. If I want to give my guy a 5% raise, I'm going to try and figure out how to make that matrix just right so that he gets a 5% raise. Exxon has traditionally ranked people across the world, and that's their prerogative. They can do it. But the reality is it does create some internal competition. So I think you got to think about what is it we're trying to do. What I'm trying to do is develop people. Having a development plan as part of performance evaluation is great. I can have a development plan that we sit down and look at monthly or quarterly, whether we're calling it performance evaluation or not. So I do think if you're a federal contractor, it's not a bad idea to have that. I'd just be real careful. The whole interview in a performance appraisal feels like somebody's judging me, feels like somebody in authority is telling me if I'm good or bad. And that you don't need that with your top people, with your professional people. And I don't mean people at the top. I mean a 20-year maintenance person. They know what they're doing right and wrong. Now we're having a conversation about needs and development. I hope that helps.
Well, it helps a lot, because right now I'm going to have a team meeting next week with all my top leaders about performance appraisals. And it's great to have additional input. I've read some articles and so forth, and we've gone away. We've drifted away from them. Even when we did them, it was hard to get the top people to do 100% across the board. And so it was always a challenge, always time consuming, and, didn't necessarily, result in, great things that you would expect. And so, I'd rather the people concentrate on their jobs, focus on getting, doing the self-improvement, the things you talked about with regard to team playing and teamwork and, productivity. And so that's really what it's about. And I really do appreciate your comments. They are totally in consonance with employee engagement, as well as Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team.
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Christel. Is Mary Gordon available to unmute herself so that we can ask Christel? We're getting close to the end. Oh, there's Mary.
I'm here.
Hey.
Yes. I appreciate taking a long time to hire somebody, but in a small business, you don't always have that luxury. Do you have any ways to accelerate the process and still get a good hire?
That's a great question. The process it's not necessarily aided by the length of time. It's really more the steps in the process. Don't cheat the steps. So make sure that I am really verifying what's on the resume, asking questions about prior experience, checking references, getting other people we'll have people back in the day when we were open and not working remotely as much, we would have people come to the office and we would set up back-to-back interviews. Now we do that by Zoom. We even ask permission to record interviews, and we'll have people watch them separately but have the same questions that they fill out about the candidate's strengths and weaknesses or fit. And then I think, going through the whatever background checks, we now do a pretty heavy duty social media profiling. We stalk people pretty well for ourselves and in our executive searches, and it's amazing what you can find out. So great question, Mary. It doesn't, you're right, we're small business too. You don't have to take a whole lot of time. It's more about being methodical in what you're doing.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Christel. So Christel, you are on track to answer every question. Here, the last one, if Karen Randall is still on, she can unmute. Or if not, I'm happy to ask. So.
Yep, I'm here, Tom. Thank
hey,
you.
Karen.
So what I'm wondering is when you have difficult conversations that you have with your team members, but you're working remotely, what's the best way to do that if you can't do that in person?
Yeah, I think that preparing the person in the sense of not having a surprise or something that they think is an ambush is really important. So I don't think you need to send them an email and say, I want to have a difficult conversation with you, but I want to have a conversation where we can talk about your success, your role, how well you're doing, how we can do better. If you're doing it in a coaching type of environment, Karen, then you can certainly say, I want to know what resources or help I can give you to make you more successful. I would talk about my expectations, but what I can do. If it's really more of a verbal sort of, I'm going to try and get your attention, then it would be more of, I want to talk to you about your role and your contribution and how we can make that better. And then I would be more directive. I find, and of course, I'm from New Orleans and live in Baton Rouge, I'm from the South, but when you open a conversation with an employee, whether you're on Zoom or in person, and you start talking about the scores of the football game last night or how's everybody, you've lost it. That this is now just another conversation. So I think that you want to be fairly directive in your opening. You want to be supportive and say, look, we wouldn't be having this discussion if I didn't think you were valuable, okay? You're very valuable. So let's talk about how we can get your contribution to what I think you're capable of doing, and I know you think that too, and really put it out there that way. If you think that, because even though it's hard to see all body language in Microsoft Teams or Zooms, you can see facial expressions, and if you think the person may have been offended or maybe hurt in some way, even if you know you're right, pick up the phone and call them the next day and have a little chat with them, have a little conversation. How are you doing? Thought a lot about our conversation. Have you had a chance to think about it? Do you have some questions? I suggest we do that even when we're in the office and going down the hall, but that's a great question. Those are difficult to do. I have found people turn around. Sometimes after that, it's a wake-up call. If you see no change within 30 days, they're never changing. You're either going to see it and they're trying and they're just not, I'm not on time. I'm trying to be on time, but it's really hard for me. You see some movement there or you see nothing. And if you see nothing, then, you kind of have to move to the next level.
Well, Christel, thank you so much, and Karen, and all of the participants, whether you asked a question or not, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Christel, it is always a pleasure to speak with you and to see you on this remote, the remote platform. So thank you for taking so much time to help share some of your experience as a strategic professional who work with businesses large and small. So folks, please don't forget to join us tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern Standard for breakout session of your choice. And then, drum roll, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard, the Dream Big Awards. And these are some of the most inspirational finalists we have ever seen kind of come through the virtual doors of the U.S. Chamber, and it's definitely worth tuning into. So thank you, all of you. And there is an extra credit this afternoon, Leading and Living Well in Anxious Times. If you missed that, then jump back again tomorrow. And thank you, all of you, for your participation.